Okay, now looking at some of the examples of those properties that I had just finished talking about. You notice it says to evaluate without a calculator because, as I mentioned, with most calculators, when you use the LOG key, that's only going to work when it's a base 10. Of course, you do also have the LN. So for the most part, these problems we're fixing to do can't be done with a calculator anyway, but each one of those will definitely fit one of the three properties. So as I go through, like instead of me pulling the piece of paper up here 4 or 5 different times, and talking about the properties, I'll refer to property 1, property 2, property 3. So, you will have numbered those in your notes and know what I'm talking about. Okay, so with this first one actually fits property 3. So like if you look at it, and what I'm going to do is just put number 3 over here to the side. So if you want to have that in your notes so you'll know which property goes with which problem, you can. So looking at property 3, the key to this, remember, is whatever number you have here, you have to have the same number there. And I do. They're both 5s. Therefore, my answer is going to be whatever I have in this argument here. So my answer is 7. Okay, number 2 actually fits the first property, and the thing about the first property is having a positive 1 as your argument. If you have a positive 1 as your argument, your answer is going to be 0 every single time. Okay, this next one actually fits property number 2. So the key to this is whatever you have as your subscript here, you do have to have the same number here. And if those two are the same, then this is going to be equal or equivalent to whatever the exponent is. In this case, that's going to be equal to 2. So like those 3 look exactly like those properties. Now, sometimes we're going to have to do some rewriting, and that's actually what you're going to see on several of these next problems, is actually having to rewrite it. The thing about these two, like the first and the third property, those problems will always look exactly like the property. If you look at one of these problems and it doesn't look like one of the properties, it's actually going to be the second property. We're just going to have to rewrite it to make it look like it. But typically, when you're dealing with these two properties, you never have to bother rewriting. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at, or the next one, we have log base 3 of 81. So as I was telling you, that doesn't look anything like any of the 3 properties. It is the second property, but we just got to rewrite it. One thing for you to remember is you never can rewrite your base. So like this is a base of 3. I cannot change that. I can only rewrite my argument. Now, value-wise, you've got to keep it the same number. Like it's still got to be the value of 81, but I just want it to look different. Just like you have the fraction of 1/2, you can also write it as 5/10, 0.5. They look different, but it's still the same number. So on this one, if I've got a base of 3, then that means that I have to have a 3 in my argument, but to use that property, it has to have an exponent on it. So you just need to figure out 3 to what power is the same thing as 81, in which that would be to the 4th power. So my answer is 4. So that's what I mean by rewriting it. Okay, the next one, we're also going to have to rewrite this one. Now I've got a base of 2, which means I'm not going to change that. 2 things we're going to need to do to this problem, and I'm going to do it in 2 steps. Because you have a fraction, well, before I deal with that, I'm going to get it, since this is a 2, I need to get a 2 going right here. So I can actually change the 16 to be 2 to the 4th. So 1 over 2 to the 4th is the same thing as 1 over 16. But to use the property, I need to have just a 2 right here, 2 to a power. So I can take this 2 to the 4th that I have in my denominator, move it to my numerator, remember which causes the sign of the exponent to change. So now it looks exactly as your property, and it's just equal to -4. Okay, next one. Now, rewriting this one was something that I talked about earlier. If you've got a radical, you can always rewrite a radical using an exponent. You do have to remember you've got an understood 1 underneath here as an exponent, but this is a square root, which means you have an understood 2 there. So I can rewrite this as 3 to the 1/2 power. Remember, the exponent's your numerator, the root is your denominator. So of course, now that those are both 3's, your answer is 1/2. Okay, next. Now this next one's probably about the trickiest one that you will have to deal with, because you can't change the base, remember, that has to stay at 25. Alright, so that means I've got to somehow rewrite a 5 but using a 25. So the fact that you've got to make it a bigger number is kind of what's confusing for you sometimes. The way that this is going to work is, and I'm going to again take 2 steps, I'm going to rewrite 5 as square root of 25, because I mean square root of 25 is 5. So those are equivalent expressions. So now what I just did on the previous problem, remember where I rewrote the radical, this would be the same thing as 25 to the 1/2 power. So now my answer is 1/2. Okay, this next one incorporates common log. So we talked about common log a while ago. If I have log without a subscript, you've got to remember you've got an understood 10 right there. So all I would have to do to rewrite this one would be to change 1,000 to be 10 to the 3rd. So you had to remember this is a 10, an understood 10, so therefore you knew that you needed to get a 10 here. So answer is 3. Okay, rewriting this next one. This time I've switched over to ln. So what you've got to remember anytime that you're dealing with ln is that you have an understood e. Okay, so you notice that what I do have here involves an e already, but it's not just e to a power. So this goes back to rewriting like I did a fraction a while ago. All that you need to do here is take e to the 4th, bring it to the numerator, which will change your exponent then to be a -4. So there's your answer for that one. Okay, one more using the properties. This one you actually don't have to rewrite. This actually is the property number 3. So if you'll glance back and look at your property number 3, the deal with it is what you have here has to be the same as what you have here, which is an understood e, because this is ln. That's what lets me know that I do have an e there. So this is just going to be equal to the x squared.